that up.
So they should be okay.
Will the boozy lot standing at the bar please get a move on?
Right, club members, if I could have your attention, please. Obviously, Lofty doesn't require any introduction whatsoever. I might just add that it's been a very great pleasure for myself and many club members to have known Lofty a lot better over the past 2.5 months. I've learnt that he's got an incredible sense of humour, limitless energy. He's leaving us all behind, and a couple funny stories where it's very hard to offend the man as well. Not that I don't hope we've done anything along those lines, but the New Zealanders evidently slipped up a couple of times, and I have the latest magazine, and there was one instance where I think it's worded one indiscreet New Zealand member walked through the door, and her words were, "Where's this old palmy fogey we've come so far to meet?" And the reply was, "I'm right behind you." Secondly, there's an accusation in the New Zealand magazine that Lofty has learned some very bad habits from the South Australians, in so much that he continually refers to the lady president as Mother Superior. But I can assure you it didn't come from us, so it must be the Melbourneites. However, obviously you haven't come here tonight to listen to me. You've had enough of me. We're all here to listen to Lofty. I have requested a few stories that Lofty has told me personally that I think are a scream. So without any further ado, it's with great pleasure again I introduce to you Lofty England.
Thank you, President. I won't call you the father inferior. Comfort means everything, doesn't it? Well, I think I may as well start off by saying something which I'm sure is of interest to you all. It's all about Adelaide, where you have a Grand Prix race of some sort here last year, I believe. And I understand it's intended to have again. Now, I did read in the paper over the last couple of days, you may not have seen this, but it's of considerable interest to you, that the FISA, Fédération Internationale Sportive Automobile, has decreed that races will now take place for 5 years at the same venue. And this, in England, applies to Silverstone. So Silverstone has got the British Grand Prix for 5 years, and I would assume that Adelaide will have the Australian Grand Prix for 5 years, which must be of considerable benefit to your friends here, who might otherwise have it taken away from them. So Adelaide, as I see it, is on the international calendar. The other interesting in that connection was that I did also read, it's irrelevant really, that some gent with a lot of money just bought Brands Hatch for a few £1 million, only to find, of course, that they aren't going to have a Grand Prix there for some time to come. Now, in connection with the Adelaide Grand Prix, I do recollect, in fact, the previous meeting I came to, and I think also this evening, there was a chap from the CADS Club, a fellow called Ben Cartwheel, or some such name, who spoke very, very briefly on both occasions about certain events which might take place at the Adelaide Grand Prix. The last time I was here, you were going to have racehorses competing with Concorde and a couple of battleships going around the circuit before the race. But that seems to sort of gone down a bit now. But that did sort of remind me of a little story which you may enjoy. Because apart from my many and varied activities with Jaguar cars, I was for a great many years chairman of the British car manufacturers Motorsport Committee. And you may, or some of you know, that the Grand Prix was held at Silverstone for many years. And then somebody persuaded the RAC, and it is the Royal Automobile Club who have the Grand Prix, in fact, and it's run at Silverstone for them, but they actually ran it twice at Aintree. And in those days, Aintree, which, as you probably may know, is a place where the Grand National horse races takes place, it was owned by good Mrs. Topham, now departed this world, and they apparently thought they ought to have the Grand Prix race at Aintree every year. So there was great pressure put on this, and this resulted in a meeting being held at the RAC to which all the people interested were invited, including myself. It turned out to be a somewhat hilarious meeting because a number of the people who came along had just come from the reception after Reg Parnell's wedding, when a lot of champagne had been sunk. So it was kind of amusing, and the good Mrs. Topham was not really clued up on motor cars. She couldn't understand why trade representatives for sparking plugs and brake linings should have free passes when people who are going to do horses didn't need such things. They didn't have any brake linings on horses, she thought. Anyway, this all went on for a long time, a lot of argument about whether it should be at Aintree or whether it should be at Silverstone and all this, and we weren't getting anywhere. So in my own very diplomatic manner, and I'm sure by now you know what a diplomat I am, I did make a brilliant suggestion, I thought, and I said, I think I can solve this problem for you, ladies and gentlemen. Why not have the British Grand Prix motor car race at Silverstone one year, and the Grand National at Aintree the same year, and the next year have the British Grand Prix at Aintree, but have the Grand National at Silverstone. It wouldn't be very difficult to put a few jumps up. That rather solved the whole problem, and they didn't have it at Aintree anymore. Now, in these sort of laugh connections, I must tell you all how much I've enjoyed being in Australia, because I find it is most educational. And of course, on this occasion, I've been here rather longer than my previous visit, so I've got to know more about the people, whom I like immensely, and the country, which I like immensely, but also to learn something about the signs, which I find most interesting. And for example, one finds in this great city of Adelaide, in which you have plenty of time to look at the signs between each road which has got red lights on it, and which seems to be designed, I'm assuming that the Adelaide City Council has shares in Ferodo and Mintex, because the amount of brake lining wear must be enormous, and also assume that they haven't yet calculated the amount of emissions which come out of a motor car each time you stick your hoof down to go away from the traffic lights, which makes the emission state in Adelaide about 10 times as bad as if you didn't have so many traffic lights. However, they will find out. But in that connection, while one is sort of browsing along at this immense speed, averaging about 4 miles an hour or something, one has time to look at these lovely signs, which have amused me immensely. One sees such things as aged pedestrians. The next one I expected to see was aged drivers, but I didn't see that, although it was briefly followed by 75, and I thought that was getting at me a bit. And then you get blind pedestrians. The next one I thought we were going to have blind drivers, but I didn't see that either. But then they had rather the best one, I thought, was that horses riding on bicycles prohibited. And that I thought was a particularly good one. And then we have yet another one, which is also very good, which I noticed it says, Form 1 lane, Form 2 lane, Form 3 lane. Now what the hell do Form 4 and Form 5 kids do when they go to school? They've got Form 1, 2 and 3, all got special lanes, and the others haven't. And then today I saw another sign, End School Limit. Now I must say I agree with that, because if these kids have got trouble getting to school, they're not going to be properly educated. And if you're not properly educated, you can get into problems, which we don't have too many sort of squeamish people. There is a little story about that which amuses me. Probably at the end of the last war, this was the World War II, not the Boer War. A couple of chaps looking for a job. They looked in the paper in London, you see, and they saw lady with Scottish estate requires 2 strong young men to work on estate, adaptable and so on, willing to everything and so on, so apply Lady X, 42 Park Lane, London. So these chaps go along and they're duly interviewed, and of course she asks them all about this and that and the other, how old they are and are they fit and so on and whatnot. It seems to be going on very well, and she said, but there is one thing. Do you realise that my estate is in Scotland and my staff all wear the kilt? Do you have any objection to wearing the kilt? And they said, oh, not at all, my lady. So then she said, well, that's fine. Now just let me see your testimonials. And as they were walking down the drive, one said to the other, do you know, Fred, if we'd been better educated, we'd have got that job. Now then, my friend, the other thing I saw, which is some amusement, in reading your magazine, as I always do, of course, cover to cover, there was a reference to somebody who amazed to find that they had got a Jaguar car assembled in South Africa. I thought I'd better tell you that I think we produced something approaching 20,000 cars in South Africa over the course of the years. And this all started after the war, of course. All our grateful dominions who were given the push-off by a fellow called Errol Wilson or something, shut the door so you couldn't get any cars in unless you manufactured them locally. So we had to get down to manufacturing of a sort cars in South Africa, and the basis was that you could only get import licenses relative to the amount of local content you put into what you were producing. So it was a hard graft to do this, and particularly hard in the case of Jaguar, because as some of you have taken the engine out will know, the engine is extraordinarily heavy, and in comparison with a certain German car whose name is never mentioned in these circles, which the engine is light. So the biggest problem was to get the weight down. However, we flogged on with that, and we got up to about 28% local content, using things like wheels, tyres, glass, batteries, radiators, so on, so leather, trim material, all sorts of things. And then by a bit of good luck, we got involved with BMC, one of the bits of good luck. So we were able to switch our assembly over to BMC in Blackheath, which is by Cape Town. And moreover, they had got stacks of permits left over from Riley, Wolseley and the like, which they didn't need. So we were able to sweep those up, and we then actually got up to 2,500 cars a year at one time, before a certain organisation, which had 4 letters, made a Charlie the old thing, and brought it to a bit of a grinding halt. However, the fact is that there were something like 15,000 or more Jaguar cars assembled in South Africa. Might also interested to know, I'm sure you are interested, we did assemble cars in Mexico, the Mark 1, 3.4, must have been back in 1958-59, until the Mexican government decided that they were only going to allow 3 makes of car to be assembled in Mexico. We assembled them in Ireland, that's ERA, from 1937 onwards in small quantities. And we assembled them in Belgium, what you call the Mark IV drop-head coupe. It was assembled in Belgium in 1948. And later on we assembled the XJ6 over there, about 1972-3 period. And we also did some in Singapore. That's about all, I think. But this may interest you, but it probably also interest you to know a little story relating to South Africa. Well, I think some of you may have heard of something called British Leyland. And when it was formed, one of the directors of the main board was a chap called Jack Plain, a nice sort of guy, rough and tumble sort of bloke like me. And he had originally gone out to South Africa as a service engineer for Gardner diesel engines. And he stayed there, and he set up his own company, and he made a lot of money, sort of millionaire. All these chaps are millionaires, except me. And then later he met up with old Stokes, and they got together, and he became a director of Leyland South Africa. So then when British Leyland Motor Corporation was formed, he was made the overall main board director responsible for all international business for British Leyland, from which you will understand he had just the right chap for the job. He knew nothing about the motor car market, so he was just the right chap to be in it. So time went on, but we got along all right. He and I sort of spoke to the same terms, you know, and all was going on very pleasantly. We were carrying on assembling our motor cars in South Africa. Until one day our sales director rang me up and he said, "Have you seen this memo from Trevor Webster?" Well, Trevor Webster was the number 2 bloke for Jack Plain in London. I said, "No, Alan, I haven't. What is it?" And he says, "It simply says here," he said, "you'll love it. Note, no more suppliers of Jaguar CKD kits for South Africa are required after March 1974. I said, "Oh, yeah? And why would that be?" He said, "Doesn't say." So I say, "Okay, well, leave it to me." So I ring up Trevor Webster and say, "What's all this about, Trevor?" "Oh," he said, "don't you know? Old Jack was here last week," he said, "and he went to Rover, and they showed him all their new things, and they showed him the P8. All looking aghast. The P8 was the car Rover had planned to beat the XJ6, because as you may know, Leyland bought, first of all, Triumph, then they bought Rover before British Leyland Motor Corporation was formed. So the plan was that the Triumph sports car would outdo the MG, and believe it or not, in spite of the fact that all the lot went out of it, they still went on with the same policy, and that's why MG disappeared. And the Rover was going to beat Jaguar. So when we went into the piece of PLMC, the Rover had got this mid-engine sports car, which is going to see off the E-Type. And they also got this P8 saloon, sort of a rather largest, sort of slightly American-looking sort of thing, which was going to see off the XJ6, you see. Anyway, we managed to talk them out of the sports car. So they've still got this P8 thing going on, believe it or not. So old Jack goes to Rover, you see, and they show him this car. And Trevor Webster says, oh, and he said he thought this was just a job. Just the right car for South Africa. So he said, okay, we'll have this in future. We'll cancel all these Jaguars from March 74. I thought, oh, yeah? So I say to Trevor Webster, and when's old Jack coming again? Oh, he said, next week. So as he got a day free, he said, Wednesday. So I said, put it down there. He must come to Jaguar. I want to show him all our new things we're doing. So by this time, anyway, I decided we ought to have a long wheelbase, XJ1, and I'd done some we do these things very technically, you know. You have all these great body of people around, and you cut a photograph in two, and stick it together, and see which way it looks best, you see. Decide it looks best with longer back doors, and that's going to be it. So Sir William was then retired, but come in occasionally. So I said, Sir William, we are going to have a long wheelbase XJ6 between now and Tuesday. And this was Thursday. So he said, what for? And I explained, and he said, a good idea. So we cut 1 1/2, and we put 4 inches in the middle, and got it all painted up and trimmed, that sort of thing, looking all nice, and we had it sitting in the body development department. So I said to them, well, let me handle this one, you see. So he said, that's okay. So Jack Plane turns up, my little friend about this high, you see. So I take him all around the factory and get him good and tired. And then show him all our new developments and explain. He doesn't understand anyway, but I show him all this stuff. Then say, Jack, it's very noisy here. So come and sit in this car a minute. So I get him in the back of this long wheelbase thing, you see. And he's sitting there. His little legs are here and the seats are about where you are. So I say, you got enough room for your legs, Jack? Oh, Christ, yes, he said. I said, are you absolutely sure you got enough room? Oh, Christ, yes, you got enough room for you're comfortable? Beautiful, he said. I said, what the bloody hell are you talking about? And having these rovers, you can forget that. Okay, he said, let's cancel it. Now, this is how British Leyland was run, so you can begin to understand what it's all about. Now, on the same score, my friend here, before I forget it, was talking about some amusing stories I had told him. And I have to really tell you, too, because we had a super bloke called Bob Knight, who I'm sure you've all heard of, who was the chap he was our development engineer under Bill Haynes, and he was extremely good on ride and handling and road noise suppression. And there's no argument at all. He was the chap who did all the work which resulted in the XJ6 being and still being the finest riding, best handling, quietest motor car on the market today. Now, the amusing story is that, apart from that, this chap was a bachelor. Any bachelors here? Not many, right. Anyway, he was a bachelor all his life, I mean. And he avoided it the whole time, you know. And he lived with his mother and father, and he was a bit of an old woman. And he was a good engineer, but a lot of these engineers, I suppose we've got a lot of engineers here, but be careful, they need a bit of pushing on a bit, you see. And if you've got someone behind him who could sort of give him a bit of a boot at the right moment, that was all right. Anyway, after I had left, seemingly there was nobody there with a large enough boot, or knowing enough to be able to know when to apply the boot, you see. So things dragged on a bit. And then, as you may remember, after the thing went up the Swanee, it had this little bloke, Michael Edwards, who came in as chairman of British Leyland. And he had one of these brilliant ideas. The top 100 people should have a psychological test, you see. This was the real whiz-kid stuff, this was. And this would tell you who's really good and who's not good. So Bob Knight, being a bit, you never believe this, he decides he's going to be the best at this job. So the net result of that was nothing was done in the way of any engineering work for Jaguar cars by him anyway for about 6 months. So during the 6 months period, he deferred his interview with the, what you call him, brain psychologist, like trick cyclist, that's right, no, trick cyclist. And in the meantime, he interviewed every person who'd been for this test, got them to come and see him, or he went to see them and asked them all the questions. And I can tell you, this would take a matter of hours with him. He was a very slow-speaking sort of bloke who didn't do anything quickly, you see. So this would take quite a long time. So anyway, after some months, he eventually got his interview, but this time he knew all the questions and all the answers. So they thought he was wonderful. Said, Mr. Knight, you are absolutely outstanding. You are the best man we've had. Your ability to make decisions is the best of anybody we've had. He couldn't make a decision in his life. He admits it himself. In fact, he took an hour and a half to tell me this story. So anyway, they made him managing director, which wasn't a great success. I think he'd be the first to agree on that. But anyway, he was replaced in due course after John Egan arrived on the scene. But he is a chap who made a very great contribution to the company, which should not be forgotten. But in relation to this, he also had a sense of humour. And you may know or not know that one time, before we got mucked about a bit, we had 52 police forces in Great Britain using Jaguar cars, which meant that if you're around England, you ought to watch your step a bit, you see. And then, of course, the great British Leyland thing, they got the fleet sales and they got all this and the special organisation for selling cars to the police and whatnot, where we did the whole thing with about 3 blokes. They had about 330. And so they decided to flog this damn Rover thing to the police, you see. So this juncture, BMW think we ought to get in on this. Then we learned that the Thames Valley Police, one of our oldest and most respected police customers, had a BMW for test. So Bob Knight and I had been to Turin show or somewhere, and we came back and we started motoring away from London Airport into the Thames Valley Police area. And he suddenly said to me, "I think we ought to have a little discussion." "Oh," said I. "What, Bob?" "Just what sort of action we'd take if we happened to be stopped by the police in one of those BMW things." "Right," I say, "let us have the discussion." "We better go through the whole thing, piece by piece," he says. "The man will come past us because we will be going too fast, and he will hopefully be by himself." They usually are. "And he will flash his signs and whatnot, and he will pull up in front of us, and we just sit there, and he will come back and says, 'I ask to inform you he was exceeding the legal speed limit, and I shall have to report this matter to the Chief Constable with a view to prosecution. You was doing 78 miles an hour in a 70 limit.' And we say to him, 'We do not care what you think, my man. You can take a running jump.'" And he, "Ho, ho," he says, "ho, ho. Want to be bloody funny, eh? Want to get yourselves into real trouble, do you? Ho, 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 ho. Not at all," we say. "You are the one that will be in trouble, because we have come to the conclusion that you are masquerading as a policeman." The Thames Valley Police Force would never send one of their policemen out in a German car, and we intend to exercise our civilian rights and make a civilian arrest, and we are taking you in. At this moment, we snatch the keys of his car out of his hand, we throw them over the hedge, we stuff him in the back of our car, and we motor off to the local police station. And we report him to the police for masquerading as a policeman. I thought that was a good story. Anyway, having gone all through that lot of my repertoire, we better come back to where we started, because, as you know, I was here 2 months ago, and I had the great pleasure of seeing a lot of good friends I made here 4.5 years ago, and meeting a lot of new ones. I must say I like Adelaide, and I like South Australia. I thought your national rally here went extremely well. I'm pleased to tell you, everybody I met afterwards when I went around Australia thought the same. In fact, it was a great event, and I think one to be copied and an example to others. And of course, the good thing is that everybody tries to do better than the previous one. So the Tasmanians have got quite a job to do for the next one next year. However, while I was here, I had 1 or 2 antics. My friend Mr. Cook over there thought I ought to go on the glider, hoping, I suppose, that something might happen, but he didn't. I came down again. I quite enjoyed it. I'd never flown a glider, so that was quite fun. And then we, of course, had a nice little trip out in the cool of the evening on Roland Short's small yacht. Marvellous how much money these chaps make out of parts, isn't it? But, and a few more antics like that. And then I went off to Tasmania from here, and I think you may all know that the Tasmania has a very active club there, but fairly recently they've split it up into 2 regions, or north and south. I mean the north of the island and the south of the island, for those who don't understand that. So I went first of all to the north, landing at Launceston, pronounced by the Australians as Launceston, and stayed with the chap who runs the northern end of it, whose name I've forgotten. who lives in Georgetown, nice little place up on the north, a little harbour, very adjacent to a big aluminium smelting plant, where they do good business apparently, being supplied with very cheap hydropower by the Tasmanian government. That's why they got it there, I'm told. So we had a bit of a butcher's hook, that means look to you, along the north coast, along through Burnie and Ulverston and whatever it is, and Devonport, where we saw this magnificent ship, on which some of you are spending your money next year to go to Tasmania. It looks super, actually. And had to go to Launceston, of course, had to look at the casino. Wherever I go, they take me to casino. That's a waste of time. I haven't got any money. And have a look at the old Longford race circuit, of course, which I'm sorry to tell you has now been destroyed, because when I was last there, you could still motor all the way around it. Now they've taken away the bridges and things, so unless you're dead keen to go in the water, there's no way of getting across. And so then we had an awfully nice evening in a travel lodge place. You had a travel lodge thing here, didn't you? They had one there. Very, very good indeed. Super evening, and about 40 or 50. This is a northern section turned up for this epic occasion. So then one of the chaps there, who comes from Perth, as a Perth in Tasmania. You know, people pinch names, like one or two here have been pinched from England. And so he said, could you, next day, we were going to south, you see, to meet up with the other chaps from the south halfway. Would I go and inscribe my name on the foundation stone of his new house? Do anything once, England, you know. So we go to Perth, Tasmania, and he's got it all ready, the old floating concrete. So any time you go to Perth and look for this chap's magnificent house, he was a Jaguar service dealer, so he's bound to have a magnificent house. You will find this lovely stone inscribed there, Lofty England, you see. So then we carry on to, we meet up at a place called Ross, I think, with Ted, what's his name? Who? Tom Hay. And we motor back in his XJ6 to Hobart, and had a very pleasant time in Hobart, doing all the usual things, including they had hired, or managed to arrange rather, I think, for the to have the police academy facility on the first Sunday I was there, and even have the skid track, which had not been done with, I think it was done with concrete, but it must have been done with smooth concrete. However, with the application of somebody going around pouring gallons, buckets of oil over it and buckets of water, it seemed to produce enough sort of slippery contact for most people to go around in circles. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, and a lot of RPM and whatnot. I think a few engines broken and whatnot. So comes the time when good Mr. Tom Hay says, why not take my XJ6 round? You see? Well, you probably know I spend all my time in the winter driving on ice, which gives you a little experience of going around these sort of things on oil, you see. So I just motored it around quietly, in sort of third gear with no wheel spin, this sort of thing. They seemed to surprise them, this, because I think I went around faster than they had, and this, set it back a bit. So anyway, that was fun. And then there's also a nice bloke there called Tilly, Stan Tilly, who was a keen aviator. He, in fact, 50-odd, I suppose. Why he's an aviator, he runs a parts business and accessories. And has his own sort of aerobatic aircraft. But we didn't go in that. So we had another one and went with Tom Hay and a couple of other blokes for the big trip. When I was there last time, he went flying, he and I together. I explained I did once fly many years ago when I was slightly younger, about 50 years ago. And so we toddled off in this aeroplane, four-seater thing. And we were going to go and look at the south end of Tasmania, but the weather was poor, so we went up north, and the weather was decidedly poor, and it was extremely bumpy. In spite of having sort of a full harness on, pulled out as tight as I could pull it, I just about knocked myself out twice on the roof. And the bloke in the back knocked the trimming off, so I suppose it must have been bumpy. Anyway, we landed at Launceston for lunch, and toddled around, and it was a very, very nice way of seeing country, actually. So if some of you go there, I mean, probably a little trip around an aircraft over Tasmania, it's quite interesting, really, because it's not a big place, you can get around. We did all the other things, of course, the usual sort of chat-ups and this sort of thing, and whatnot. And then I pressed on back from Tasmania to Newcastle. Newcastle is in New South Wales, not Newcastle on Tyne, and it's located north of Sydney. So I was met by a very nice bloke called Tom Herald when I arrived at Sydney Airport, and motored in a very nice two-door 4.2 XJC belonging to the Newcastle Jaguar dealer up to Newcastle, or outside Newcastle. I would recommend it because Newcastle is a steel and sort of coal town, but the surrounding countryside is beautiful. I mean, it is really beautiful. Lovely beaches, and the weather was nice. A bit unusual, you know, for Australia, but the weather was nice. And it was really most enjoyable. And there are quite a few things to see. And needless to say, the local Jaguar dealer has got a big boat. On this occasion, no sails, but a sort of a 40-foot cruiser. So we had that out one day for about 4 or 5 hours around Lake whatever it is, just down between south of Newcastle. Very, very big lake. And that was really fun. And the whole thing was great fun, actually. So, again, all the usual act, you know, the meeting everybody and so on. And they're a great crowd of people, terrific. I mean, they're the newest club, I think, Newcastle, in Australia. Correct. They've only been going 2 years, but they've already got, I think it's 90 or so, 100 members, and most enthusiastic, very nice motor cars, jolly nice people. So, from there, we motored down one Sunday, halfway to Sydney, to a place called the Ferneries, right, where we meet up with the Sydney band. And the Ferneries, as you might be surprised to know, is a place where they've got ferns. They've also got animals, and animals in Australia consist of kangaroos and koala bears and those sort of things. Very nice place, actually, the usual picnic spot. You can even, believe it or not, have a barbecue. So from there, I'm taken over, and I'm motored up to Sydney, where I stayed with Ian Cummins, whom I'm sure you all know of. Hell of a nice guy. I had a very quiet time in Sydney, actually, apart from having to address about some 250 keen Jaguar types one night, do a few things like that, and go out and see a cousin of my wife who lives at Wollongong, which is next door to Wollongong, where some of you people have been for some sort of rally. So then I go up to Canberra, and Canberra, as you may know, is a little different from the rest of Australia. But good people and keen club, and I did all sorts of things there again, but no boating. I did there, no boating there. I saw art museums and God knows what. In fact, what pleased me very much was I decided to chance all these art museums and go into this and that, and you had to pay to go in. So I thought to myself, well, I don't know, you're age England, surely there must be a reduced price. So going around with John Bray, I'd say, leave this to me, one pensioner, one teenager. And they would say, who's the teenager? I said, well, it's not me, you see. So, and believe it or not, I got 50% off on this for myself. This worked very well. Anyway, while I was there, I did drive a train. And there's a wonderful bloke up in Canberra called Stan something. I can't remember his other name. And I met him last time I was there, and he's got about, I don't know, 6 Jaguars in various shapes and forms, about one of which at least runs normally. But incredible sort of engineer. And when last time I was there, I saw this. He had built a quarter-scale traction engine. And I mean, it's a quarter-scale, perfect traction engine himself. You know, quite a small little sort of basement, semi-basement thing. So how the hell did you do that? Well, he got a lathe and he got a milling machine. And he said, well, I had to go around the scrap yards and find a gear cutting machine to do the gear. But he said, I managed to find one, I reconditioned it, and he'd actually made all this thing. Anyway, now, to amuse himself, there's a something village. What's it called? It's like down in the Cotswolds in England, there's one of these model villages where and there's an English pub and all this, I can't name it now. Anyway, if you go there, you'll find it. And it's got the usual lake, and the little railway, a quarter-scale railway, runs all around this lake, you see. So he amuses himself driving this thing, and his father made this engine. It's a perfect railway engine. All runs on steam, you know, or something. So, of course, I had to drive that. Pictures available later. 25 cents each. So that was great fun, the usual performance there. So I came back from Canberra and then went to New Zealand. New Zealand is a small island, some 2,300 kilometres away from Sydney. All right? To get there, you have to pay the Australian government $20 to get out of Sydney Airport, which I think is a bit of an imposition. But I suppose they must reckon that anybody leaving in Australia is pleased to do so, so they won't miss the $20. However, I go to New Zealand, where I was met by the Mother Superior, and she has an XK150S Roadster, and I also have a Mark II 3.8, and she has an MGB, so they don't do so badly. So I was duly installed, and I stayed with the Mother Superior. Her husband was there too, by the way. And so the next day we had a great get-together at the Ellerslie Racecourse. Ellerslie Racecourse is for horses. So they've got 240 members in the Auckland Jaguar Drivers Club, and believe it or not, there were over 120 motor cars turned up. Absolutely fabulous. And out of 120, I don't think there were more than 3 which you could sort of class as scuffy. They were really beautiful motor cars, super. And what is more, not only did have all these great enthusiastic people with these beautiful motor cars, I also met once more John Lawrence. And John Lawrence lives in Auckland. And John Lawrence was second in Le Mans 1957, driving the Curious car. And has lived for many years since in New Zealand, so that was a great treat for me. I also met up with 2 blokes who had worked for me in the Jaguar service department and still spoke to me. And they'd been down there for some years. So they had all sorts of usual activities, of course, including the good lady who she was a bit shy. Actually, she was very amusing, this girl, because she sort of noted for her quips, you see. And she just made the first one a bit wrong, so I got her where I wanted her. And after that, I was able to keep her under control. Apparently, the first time she'd been under control many years. Her husband confirmed that. Anyway, while there, we went down to Hamilton, but that's a bit down the road, where they have another Jaguar Drivers. They got Jaguar Drivers Club. They got 14 Jaguar Drivers Clubs in New Zealand. So I went down to Hamilton, had to have the ride on the boat on the river. Then I then was taken down to Rotorua by the managing director of Shorters, Archibald Shorters, who are the Jaguar dealers in Auckland. And Rotorua, I'm sure you all know, you've been to New Zealand, it's a place where they got bubbling mud and this sort of thing, and the old Maori village, and you were taken around by this Maori gentleman who was very good and funny, amusing. Explains to you that, you know, in 43 seconds' time, this will squirt up here, it'll come up, this blast up through the mud into the wonderful, all by nature. So I did ask how many blokes he got downstairs with end pumps blowing it up, but he didn't see much of that. Anyway, that was good fun, and then I went down from there by plane to Christchurch, down the South Island. The plane was an Orcus Italy, yeah, HS 428, 248, somewhere or other. Oh, twin engine, huh? Is it? No. Anyway, there's 2 prop jet things. It takes about 2.5 hours to get up to altitude and about 2 minutes to get down again. Full of Japanese gentlemen and ladies with a license picklet, and they're all dragging out the front, having their photographs taken on the pilot's hat. Very amusing, really. So, get down to Christchurch, where I'm met by Ray Archibald. Now, Archibalds of Christchurch were our distributors for a great many years, and very good ones too in New Zealand. And the 3 brothers who ran the company, and they've now actually sold it out. But I was met by Ray Archibald, and a very pleasant stay with him and his wife. He, by the way, was the touring car champion of New Zealand for a great many years with his 3.8 Mark II, which he's still got. He also has the ex-Whitehead C-Type, which is in the Queenstown Museum, anytime you're down that way. And so we had a very pleasant evening with he and his brothers, and the next day set off back again, back to Auckland. I should have mentioned, by the way, I forgot about CKD. Of course, we did CKD in New Zealand, which you've probably seen somewhere recently. In fact, we did it, I think, from 1972 until 1982 or something like that. There are quite a lot of cars assembled in New Zealand. Having got back to Auckland, the sort of final piece of amusement or interest was we went up to the Bay of Islands, which is, I can recommend if you're absolutely magnificent. Almost as good as Australia, really. And it's quite a way up. It's about 250 miles north of Auckland. Is it? No, 150 miles north of Auckland. So we went sort of halfway, where they got yet another Jaguar Drivers Club, and met up with them on the Saturday and had a sort of a sandwich lunch and a bit of the old chat up and that sort of thing. And then carried on up to this place called Russell, which is up in the Bay of Islands. It's really a magnificent country, beautiful. Stay there overnight. Had to have, of course, the trip around the Bay of Islands on the boat the next day. I'm almost sort of just about to join the Navy, by the way, in this accident. And then motor back again. having acquired dice on the way back in the 38 Mark II we were in with another chap with a 38 Mark II who claims that it's a Coombs, genuine Coombs car. I think it was. I think it was supplied by Coombs. So that sort of almost brought my stay in New Zealand to the close, except I had the pleasure of meeting Noel Cortan's daughter, who is married to a New Zealander and lives in Auckland and works for some indescribable Japanese motor company. A very charming girl. It's rather remarkable how a man like him can have such a charming daughter, quite frankly. And also met up with an old mate of mine with whom he and I flew together in Texas during the war. Texas is down the bottom of America somewhere. And I'd only seen him once since the war, so it's great to see him again. He's quite young, he's only about 70. And so that really sort of brought my trip to New Zealand to a close. So then I returned from there to Melbourne. Melbourne is along the coast a bit, sort of a subsidiary or a suburb, I suppose you would call it, of Adelaide. Now, I found Melbourne a most interesting place because having studied the Australians and knowing how you feel about some things, it's something, when you're on your travels, you find most interesting things. Like, for example, one does read here that the Australians are not greatly in favour of the sort of South African idea of apartheid. In other words, there should be no race discrimination. Driving through Melbourne, you see a bloody great sign. Take away Chinese food. Why the hell shouldn't the Chinese have the food they want? Then I also thought that I appreciate that you chaps and people in Australia are very moral sort of people, and there's a great attempt being made, I think, to maintain a reasonable standard of morals in Australia. And therefore, I was very pleased to see that steps have been taken in Melbourne to keep an eye on people that might by any chance get involved in things which would not be very well sort of accepted by maybe their wives or others. But they have big signs up which says, red light camera. Do I have to explain it to you? Oh. However, in Melbourne, I did all the usual antics there, you know, like sort of going up the Dongilong, whatever it is, up the hills and so on, down the hills. So, of course, all these places, I should explain, I've had to see all sorts of car museums, you imagine that, you know, I didn't saw that. And in Melbourne, I saw some quite interesting motor cars. There's one chap there who's got all sorts of odd motor cars, including Graham Page. That's right, Graham Page. Thing we saw had the land speed record at one time, and some chap drove it halfway across Australia. This is going back a bit, but only 26 or something. A remarkable thing. Another gentleman with a very nice, who took me around and up in the hills and one thing and another, with a very nice, beautiful Mark V with an overdrive fitted. I must say the first time that I've been driven in a Mark V with an overdrive. But the enthusiasm is incredible. So he in fact took me, here's this fellow named Rice, by the way, and you've heard of Rice Tailors, I'm sure. The English company, they had an Australian company. They made horse trailers and the like. Horses are things with 4 legs with no brakes. And he is obviously reasonably well off. He's got a number of motor cars. So we were taken off way up into the country. One very wet, it's always wet in Melbourne, to see various odd, strange motor cars. There's chaps who are making specials, and it amazes. It never ceases to amaze me what people in this country do. You know, you've got to hand it out to them. It's just incredible to think they even think of starting it. Never mind doing it. It frightens me to death. I look at some of these things they're doing. You have among you a remarkable collection of engineers. Why I was ever associated with anything engineering, I don't know. I am no engineer compared with you people. Anyway, so while we were there, we also went up to Albury, where you had a rally, I think, 2-3 years ago, something like that. This was quite fun because I went up, and I should add at this point, very badly, I'm afraid, I should have mentioned that by courtesy of JRA, Jaguar Rover Australia, I have been loaned throughout my visit a very fine motor car, known as a Jaguar XJ12 Sovereign. And almost everywhere I went, I've had one of these fine motor cars, including Melbourne. So we motored up, four of us, to this Albury place to have a meeting up there with the Albury section, whatever they call themselves. And this was quite fun because these three chaps who went with me had all got a sense of humour, fortunately, including this bloke, Heinz, whatever his name is. He's a German gentleman of German extraction, who was very good at speaking Pakistani. So, oh no, I don't mean to speak properly, like this lovely gentleman, no? So, when we had the evening meeting, you see, with all the local bods who all turned up, I thought we had to do something. So I introduced him as he was the president of the Pakistani Jaguar Drivers Club. And made him make a little speech. You see, this went down quite well. So we did that, and many other things down there, whatever they were, all the usual sort of antics, dinners, you know, and chat-ups and all that sort of thing. And then from Melbourne, I go on to Perth. Perth is out that way. And there I had a most pleasant time, stayed with Jim Percival, I'm sure you all know, the only man who can take cylinder heads off XJ12 engines. And got up to all sorts of antics there. They obviously decided they were going to make good use of me. So we flew down one day to a place called Bossildon. That's down this way, down the sort of bottom of the peninsula. And incredible day out, actually, because we landed on what was a wartime airfield where apparently he met Lancaster, I gather, now owned by some chap who uses it for his own sort of private aircraft. And the interesting part, apparently it's only been out in Australia about 20 years, but he set himself up making parts for earth-moving equipment and farm machinery that you can't get in a hurry. And apparently now employs about 100 people in Bunbury. That's it, Bunbury. But the interesting part, he so enjoys his work that he's got in his own, next to his house, he's got a large department in which he does all the gear cutting himself, evenings and weekends. He's got some gear cutting machines and hardening plant, and incredible with it. So we then were met there by the Veteran Motor Car Club of Busselton, which included a gent from the council. They hadn't gotten, they only had one veteran Mark V, and the others were regrettably two Mercedes and one pre-war Oldsmobile in very nice condition. Anyway, we motored all over the place, all around this peninsula. Very interesting, actually. Flew back again at night, obviously. Then all sorts of other antics took place in Perth, including, of course, we had to go and see the British contender for the America Cup. Now, you may just well face up to the fact that you blokes ain't got a chance next time. This is going to be won by the British. So I went to have a look at that, and of course it's all been done with great help from the Australians. The British ship is parked here with all these chaps working on it, and then next to it they've got a powerboat which they use to tow it out for their daily tests. Then there's a, what do you call it, a device where you get big boats out of the water, and next to it is Mr. Bond's personal yacht. Now I couldn't see the blokes with the spy glasses, but it seemed to me rather remarkable. Mr. Bond, I understand, is something to do with the Australian boat. But by some miracle, it happens, it's just nicely placed so you can see everything that's going on, get all the secrets of the British boat to incorporate in the Australian boat. I couldn't see anybody on his boat at all. Anyway, so that was one thing. And we also went to Mr. Holmes Accord. You've heard of him, have you? He's a chap with a bit of lolly. And he's got a car museum. Know that, Neil? No. And he's got some really remarkable things. He's got a number of electric cars from way back in the 1800s or something, about 5 steam cars, odd things all the way up, including right up to Rolls-Royce, and he's got a Springfield Rolls, which was made in America before the war. Nobody bought it because it wasn't British. That's true. I'm not kidding. No, it's just quite true. They made a Springfield Rolls. It was made in America, assembled in Springfield, and the bodies were made in the Brewster Building, Long Island, where our distributor had his service department after the war, but nobody wanted it. And the Americans want the genuine imported article, you see. Yeah. So they don't make them anymore. Anyway, and they also got their most beautiful Packard, beautiful pre-war Packard V12. They made a V12 before the war. Perfect. I think they paid 150,000 quid for it, which calculated is $3,000 to you. $300,000, sorry. So anyway, out of all this great excitement, they said, perhaps you'd like to go for a ride in one of our steam cars. Yes, says I. Try anything once. So this was arranged to go back a couple of days later. for the steam car trip round, you see. It's just actually in Perth. So that particular morning, somebody had the bright idea that we would go to the casino. They've got a casino in Perth now. This is a new thing. They've had it about 4 months. So everybody in Perth steams into this and stay there all night, and the pawn shop's open just next door. We've only got about 3 cars there at the moment, I think. And somebody had the bright idea we'd meet there for breakfast at 7:30. Well, it's a very good place to go for breakfast, because they make very good breakfast, very reasonable. We got all this plan. We go there for 7:30. We go somewhere else, Mr. Eckor, for 9 o'clock, and somewhere else for this and that, you see. And staying with old Jim Purcell, he's got a family of 4, but he's got a little boy who is now 8. And the little boy is a coming musician. So every morning at 6:30 he gets out of bed and he plays Happy Birthday or Tinkle Bell on the piano, you see. And I, being an early riser, would walk along and I would sort of play a little bit at the side, add the scales or something. Anyway, so this particular day we're going to the casino for the 7:30, making one of my famous clangers. I got it firmly in my mind we were going to be there at 7. So I think to myself, be there at 7, and we must leave at 6:30 in the fine XJ12 HE Sovereign supplied by JRA. Thank you. And so that would mean getting up at 6 o'clock. So at 6 o'clock I haven't heard Tinkle Bell or Happy Birthday, so I'm out of bed and I rush along. Little boys there snoring away, so I play the scales, you see. This stirs father and mother and little boy, so we're all up. I make the tea, get them all up, off we go. We get the casino, find our way in, old Jim Purcell and I. Oh, it was 7:10. I said, we're late. He said, no, but I said, where are they all? And he said, well, I better tell you now. He said, we're not meeting them until 7:30. So after we had spoken again, about 3 hours later, we had actually a very nice party this morning. A whole crowd of people turned up, to my surprise, at 7:30 in the morning. About 20 of them. We had a very good breakfast. And then we went on to Mr. Holmes' Accor or somewhere to have the great demonstration of the steam car for England, to have the ride, you see. And he got this very keen mechanic, hell of a good bloke, and he's working like hell, trying to get it far up. It's been a bit obstinate, you see. So he sort of, apart from the usual sort of, we used to do flint and whatever it was they used in 1862s or something like that, he's trying a bit of the old welding flame up the jolly to get it going. And squirting more, and all of a sudden there's a great big burst, smoke everywhere, and it bursts all the asbestos jointing around the outside of the boiler. I felt so sorry. Anyway, so I didn't get my ride. So, not having done much boating up to this time. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed out a bit. I got back a bit, didn't I? I did a bit more. I'm sorry, Melbourne, I've forgotten now. Because you know all about the redoubtable Walter Hassan. I'm sure one of your pin-up boys is Walter Hassan. Great man who had a lot to do with Jaguar cars, Climax, Grand Prix engines. Still alive, 81, cracking on well. He has a son out here who is the technical manager of Michelin tyres for Australasia. In other words, the whole of Australia, New Zealand and God knows where. So needless to say, he's done quite well for himself. So he, of course, has got a nice 40-foot cruiser. So we had a trip on that when I was in Melbourne. That was very nice. Anyway, the other antic we did when I was in Perth, they had this chap, Saunders, who you may have heard of, who was courageous or stupid. He's already been around the world twice, alone, in a sort of about a 20-foot yacht or something. So he's now going around for 2 years on his own. And the idea, I think, is he's going to get around 3 times this time. So the great idea was that one of the club members up there, he's not in the spares business, by the way. He's got a 40-foot cruiser. So we went on this thing to see this bloke off, and it was very, very bad weather, actually. And so they didn't have more than about 50 boats seeing him off. And so we get up to the old harbour mouth, and incredible, I must say, I ended out with these blokes because he had to tack across. He went up in his old boat and then sort of changed onto his new boat, and all this lot with him sort of got the sails up and nipped off, and he's left with it. And he had to tack this across all these comedians trying to sort of keep place, get out of the way. And he's off on his way. I haven't heard what's happened to him since. I wish him the best of luck. So we just returned. We didn't go out to sea. It was a bit rough and someone. So you'll gather out of all this that my activities have been not only connected with motor cars, but have been introductions to other forms of transport, one way or another. I've yet to ride a horse. So if any of you got a horse, I ought to go back to sort of, to say I've done everything, I think. But at this juncture, having heard about enough of me, I should think by now, I would like to say how much I do appreciate all you people here have done. In the first place, it was very nice of you to suggest I should come at all, because having seen me before, you might have had other ideas. It was also very nice of you to suggest my wife should come with me, and she was hoping to do so, but as some of you may have heard, she unfortunately has to work and has a rather high-powered job. And her boss, she works in some international organization called the Atomic Energy Agency. These are the people who arrange for leaks to take place in Russia and like. And her boss changed at the wrong moment, so as she had to be there to tell him what to do about arranging for the leaks to take place, that sort of thing, she couldn't come with me, but she does send you her regards, and hopefully there may yet be a time when she will come with me. I'm more than grateful to all the people who are here who've given up so much of your time, and I mean it really sincerely. You've gone to lots of trouble, give up your time, had days off from your important jobs, to take me around, to show me the sights and one thing and another. I've even been fed here, believe it or not. And I know most of you people in Australia, you're all on a diet, you don't really eat very much. Don't laugh, you know. But I'm going back about 2 stone heavier than when I came. I now understand part of the reason for some of you complaining about high fuel consumption is all to do with the weight you're pulling. But again, thank you all very, very much indeed from the bottom of my heart. Now one more thing, sorry I've forgotten, there was a thing called Lemans last weekend. And I think you all know that 3 weeks ago or thereabouts, the new XJ6 Jaguar Walkinshaw machine won the 1,000-kilometre race at Silverstone, soundly beating the Porsche opposition by, in fact, 2 laps. This was, of course, a great success, and things look very hopeful for Le Mans. Regrettably, at Le Mans, neither of the 3 cars, to my knowledge, finished. One of them driven by Warwick and Cheever, the one chaps who won at Silverstone, was apparently running somewhere towards the end of the race, I can't tell you quite when, but went out when he had a tyre go, and the tyre went and knocked the back suspension off, and that was the end of that. And the other 2 had gone out somewhere else in the meantime. On that, I can only explain, some of you may have seen, there was unfortunately a very tragic accident where this young chap, Gardner, an Austrian, who was a very good Formula 1 driver, just up and coming, got killed on the straight in a Porsche. Why, I don't know. I suppose he took off or something. And they then had to have the pace car out for 2.5 hours while they cleared up the mess. And I would imagine, quite possibly, the reason for having a tyre go, you run over a piece of wreckage and you go through the tyre and that's it. And if you have a tyre go doing 200 miles an hour, well, that means the back of the body works off, if not the suspension as well. So that may be what happened. But in fairness, I think one should understand this much. In the days when we were motor racing, we won Le Mans a number of times, as you know. But we didn't really win a great number of short-circuit races with similar cars, these same cars, in fact. And if you look back at the C-type successes, all the C-type successes were on road circuits, and we didn't have many successes on what you might term airfield circuits. Neither did we have much success with D-types, although we were very successful with the D-type in proper long-distance road circuits. We were not all that successful on airfield circuits. Now, I think you may well take this into consideration when assessing what happened with our friends at Le Mans this time, because they won at Silverstone on what is an airfield circuit, basically. And those sort of races are very different, really, to a true road circuit. An airfield circuit like Silverstone, you've got some here, I'm sure you know, you go around long, continuous corners and a great big drift the whole way around. Whereas on a road circuit, you're not doing that sort of thing. You're going through a left and right in a big hurry on the right sort of line, and it's a different sort of motoring. And Le Mans also is won basically by the most reliable car, not necessarily the fastest car. It's very nice if you're fastest as well, but the fact is, number one importance, in Le Mans is to have a motor car which will run reliably for 24 hours with no attention. But this, of course, takes a bit of doing, and I think they were very courageous, in my opinion, to have a go at Le Mans with this new motor car, because Porsche have been there for years and years and years. They, I think, won 12 times in a row or something like that, and it's asking a lot to beat them just like that. So don't be disappointed that the first attempt with this motor car wasn't successful. There will no doubt be other times, and I'm sure we all sympathise with them, and we all wish them the best of luck. Now, thank you all very much for listening. You haven't hardly said a word. Nobody's shown anything. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks.